Wherever Saturn is placed in your birth chart is where it brings the most adversity. And remember, Saturn governs over the earth. Before the sun, that Hi, and welcome back to Beyond 5D. My name is Cadaja, and I am a new member of the 5D family. So excited to be joining you guys. And in this video, I'm going to be breaking down the 5 dimensions. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard mystics and people a part of the conscious community talk about planes of existence. And in this video, I want to dive into the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth dimension. Before we get started, the very word dimension derives from the Latin word dimensio, meaning to measure out. So the word dimension means a measurement of space in a particular direction. Many of you have heard the phrase, we live in a mathematical universe, which is absolutely true. That's why so many mathematicians and physicists create formulas and equations to understand natural phenomena and explain it to the world. We are microcosms of the macrocosm. So to give this more context, do you remember in math class when the teacher would give you graph paper so you could find the x and y coordinates? Well, let's talk about that in terms of the dimensions. The first dimension is represented by one variable, x-axis. Let's say that represents length. So imagine walking down a road and you can only go one direction. There is no up or down, left or right. It's just a straight, infinite line. Now, with the second dimension, we now have two variables, x and y. We have length and we have width. Some examples of two-dimensional figures includes a square and even a photograph, things that are on a flat surface. Now, if we talk about the third dimension, we just add another variable to that. We have length, width, and depth. So some examples of 3D figures includes a pyramid, a sphere, a cone, a cube. Okay? So that's just the basic understanding right there. Level by level, we're going up, adding more and more variables. So the first, we have x. Second, x and y, length and width. Third, we have length, width, and depth. The third dimension where there's more volume. Now, with this third dimension, I'm going to talk a bit more about key terms that we should be aware of. Those 3 key terms that I want to constantly circle back to, one is Saturn, another is holograph, and lastly, I want to talk about simulation. Now, why do I mention Saturn? How does that have to do anything with dimensions? Okay, so going back to the 3D, we live in a realm where we are governed by Saturn. What do I mean by that? Every planet within our solar system governs over a particular area, and as far as Saturn is concerned, it is the ruler of time, the ruler of karma, the ruler of death, ruler of the earth, which is why so many people who worship Saturn, who happen to be Satanists, they utilize this energy because they know that in this 3D realm, us humans are trapped in space and time. We have a birth date, we have a death date. We grow, we sustain ourselves, and then death is upon us. It's the natural process that all living organisms go through, from plants to humans and all the other living things on Earth. That's the cycle, right? An earthly cycle. But Saturn, also known as Chronos, governs over time. This is important to know because although the physical body will decay in this 3D realm, the essence of who we are is immortal, and the essence of who we are is multidimensional. But when you're stuck in the 3D realm, you may be under the idea that this is all there is. You cannot transcend space and time. I also bring up Saturn not only because of that time element, but if some of you have heard of the black cube, it's something that Satanists and people who practice the dark arts worship because, as I mentioned, as we exist on this earthly plane, the more energy we give to it, it's like an entrapment back here into this earthly plane. So all 3 major religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, The reason I'm referring to Saturn is because the elite and powers that be have deceived so many with this energy. When we hear the term Satan or Satanism, we automatically think something that is evil, wrong, bad. But in reality, it's just a reflection of Saturn, which happens to be a malefic planet, not meaning that it's bad, but wherever Saturn is placed in your birth chart is where it brings the most adversity. And remember, Saturn governs over the earth. Before the sun that we have in our sky, the original sun was Saturn, worshipped by so many people. So you have to understand that this energy is potent, and so many people in the dark arts worship this energy because it governs over this 3D prism that we exist in. Next, I want to talk about simulation theory. Now, many of us have heard, okay, we exist within a 3D field, we exist within a simulation, and that is true because just like I explained in the second dimension, some examples of 2D figures includes a square and a photograph. Think of a holograph the next level up from a photograph, whereas a camera collects information from a light field and projects it onto film. Think of the 3D or a holograph as, collecting information from a light field, projecting it onto a 3D realm. Now, let me dive deeper into that. I used to work at a school, and there was one book in particular called Astrophysics for Babies. I thought it was so interesting because the book pretty much explained how the same elements found in stars are embedded within the human avatar, which is interesting because it explains what so many mystics have said over the years, that we are literally stardust, we are starlight. So, like I said, a photograph collects information from a light field, projecting it onto a film. The light field that I'm referring to in the 3D is the ether. It is the realm above us, and we are starlight projected into human form onto this 3D realm. This is a holograph. And so many people call it a simulation because just like when you're playing a video game, right? The person behind the screen, the simulated, the imitated reality within that screen, the person is the controller. So think of that in context as, in this simulated reality, you are giving an avatar, you're given a human body, but within that is something immortal. Within that is something controlling this reality. Within this avatar is something beyond the 3D matrix that is trapped into. And just like I talked about earlier, there is a birth date, you grow, you sustain, and you die. There's an essence in you that will journey on. It is immortal, okay? So we talked about Saturn, we talked about the holograph, we talked about simulation theory. Now, within the 3D, we have to understand that some things that you may experience, people who are in the world not really connected to spirit, they may not even be aware that you can go beyond this realm of existence. They're into earthly things. They probably don't look into things like esoteric wisdom or the occult. If you want to go beyond the 3D, know that in the 4D, the next element is time. Remember, with every level that we go up, there's another variable added. And in the 4D, we can go forward in time or we can go backwards in time. We could jump through our timeline. And when we master our past timeline through shadow work, through inner work, and we project what we want into the future, that's when we truly have an understanding of the 4D, to be a time traveler, going back to different parts of your childhood, of your life, to fix areas where there's still stored trauma, where there's still past hurts, transmute that energy so that you can project yourself to a future moment where you are your best version. Now it gets even deeper than that, because although the 4D represents time, it also represents past lives. As I mentioned, you are an immortal being. Some of us have already journeyed this earth plane, many, many times, and this may be our final reincarnation to master something. And some of us may have lifetimes to go to learn certain lessons, but this earthly plane, this 3D realm, is a school, right? It is a school, and I say that to mention when you master this lifetime, going back at certain points and projecting yourself to where you want to be, you could even dive into past life experiences, undoing karma from the past, and planting certain seeds so that your next life can have certain benefits. It gets deep. It gets pretty deep. But the more you study spiritually, the more you have an understanding of how this can affect you. Okay, so just to recap, the first dimension represents length. Second dimension, we have length and width. Third dimension, length, width, depth. Examples: a cube, sphere, pyramid. It's the realm we exist on. It is trapped in space and time. And the fourth dimension represents time itself, being able to go back and forth between time. Now I want to talk about the fifth dimension. Now there's so many theories on what it means to be in the fifth dimension. The fifth dimension is all about heart coherence, unconditional love for self, unconditional self-acceptance. The heart is the first organ that develops in our mother's womb, and it's also the only organ that generates a pulse or a pump, which is emitting an electromagnetic field. And the more we love, the more we tune into our heart and do work on our heart chakra, the bigger that electromagnetic field grows, and we're able to draw all we desire into our heart space. Now, I want to talk about the astral realm, which could be found between the third and the fifth dimension. In a similar way where the dimensions have different levels, so does the astral plane, which is why sometimes people can receive downloads while they're, astral projecting, but they can also get attacked because there's different levels, there's different levels of the astral plane, right? But when we are connected to our heart space and we've forgiven ourselves for past hurts, we've forgiven ourselves from past hurts, and we've forgiven all those who've done us wrong, we're able to ascend higher states of consciousness. Now, in the beginning of this video, I was talking about dimensions in mathematical terms using X, Y, Z, different coordinates, different variables, because that's a very simple way to understand dimensions. But as we evolve higher and we go to higher planes, know that this is on a larger scope all about consciousness expansion. And the more we do that, the more we're able to go to higher levels of existence.